This orchid looks healthy enough to carry straight back into the house. The leaves are green, the roots we can see look firm, and nothing obvious is crawling across the top of the pot. But that is exactly when I slow down. After spending weeks or months outdoors, an orchid can come home with more than fresh growth. Tiny insects can hide under leaves, snails can shelter beneath a pot, weeds can establish in the medium, and a plant that looks perfectly clean from above can still carry a problem into an indoor collection. So before this orchid crosses the door, I am going to check 10 things, from the easiest places to see to the places most growers rarely look. The goal is not to prove that something is wrong. The goal is to make sure a small outdoor issue does not become an indoor collection problem. Start with the whole plant before you reach for a spray bottle, scissors, or repotting supplies. Put the orchid where you have bright, comfortable light and look at it as a complete plant. Scan the upper surfaces of the leaves. Look at the newest growth, the base of the plant, any flower spike that is still present, the flowers if it is blooming, and the surface of the potting medium. You are establishing a baseline before you disturb anything. Is there sticky residue? Are there unusual white deposits, brown bumps, tiny yellow speckles, silvery-looking patches, chew marks, webbing, or fresh damage that you do not remember seeing before? One mark by itself is not a diagnosis. Outdoor plants get dust, splashes, mechanical damage, and harmless visitors too. What matters is noticing what deserves a second look. This first inspection is also the moment to compare one part of the plant with another. If only one old leaf has a scar that has been dry and unchanged for months, that is very different from several leaves developing new spots at the same time. If a flower is naturally fading at the end of its life, that is different from tender new tissue being chewed. If the visible roots are plump and firm, make a mental note of that before you start worrying about the pot. A good inspection is not about finding reasons to panic. It is about collecting clues in an organized way. And if everything still looks clean from the top, do not make your decision yet. Turn the leaves over. The underside of the leaf is one of the most important checks because several common orchid pests prefer protected places and crevices. Support the leaf gently rather than bending it sharply, and look from the tip all the way back toward the base. Pay particular attention to the midrib, the edges, and the area where the leaf joins the plant. Mealybugs can look like small, white, cottony, or powdery deposits. Scale may appear as small, brown, or tan bumps attached to the plant. Mite damage can be easier to notice than the mites themselves, sometimes showing as fine stippling or a silvery appearance, especially on the underside. Aphids are more likely around tender growth, buds, and flowers, but the point is the same. Do not assume the clean upper surface tells the whole story. There is another reason to move slowly at this stage. Many pest signs overlap with ordinary wear. A pale patch can come from old sun damage, a brown mark can be mechanical, and a dried sheath can be normal on some orchids. What makes a pest suspicion stronger is a pattern that fits the organism. Repeated cottony clusters in protected joints, multiple scale-like bumps attached to tissue, sticky honeydew associated with sucking insects, fresh silvery stippling, or chewing that continues to appear. If you can, photograph anything questionable before cleaning it off. A close photo gives you something to compare later and can make identification easier if the symptom changes after the plant comes indoors. If you see something suspicious, resist the urge to start treating before you know what you found. A bit of dried mineral residue, a piece of bark dust, or a harmless speck can be mistaken for a pest when you are actively searching for one. Use good light, look closely, and compare more than one area. If an insect or pest sign is clearly present, the plant has already answered one important question. It should not be placed beside the indoor collection. Isolation comes before convenience. You can identify the problem and choose an appropriate control without exposing every other orchid you own. While you are examining the leaves, look into the protected junctions near the base of the plant. These tight spaces are easy to overlook because they are partly hidden from normal viewing angles. Check carefully without forcing leaves apart or damaging tender tissue. If this is a Phalaenopsis, be especially gentle around the crown. The purpose is to see into the crevices, not to flood them with cleaning solution or leave water sitting there. A plant can pass a quick glance and still hide a small pest population in exactly these protected areas. That is why a slow inspection is more useful than spraying everything just in case. Now notice what happens to the story if every leaf and crevice looks clean. We still are not finished, because the orchid itself is only part of what spent the summer outdoors. The container spent the summer outdoors too. It sat on a bench, patio, shelf, deck, or hanging area through watering, rain, dust, fallen plant material, and visits from small animals and insects. The next checks move away from the leaves and toward the pot. And this is where many growers discover that a clean plant can be sitting in a very different environment than they realized. Begin with the outside of the pot. Wipe away loose dirt and debris so you can actually see the surface you are inspecting. Look around the rim, along the sides, around any clips or labels, and between a clear nursery pot and a decorative outer pot if you use one. If the orchid sits inside a cassia pot, remove the inner pot and inspect both pieces separately. Check places where moisture and debris collect. This is not about making the pot look showroom clean. It is about removing visual clutter so that an egg mass, insect, snail, decaying leaf fragment, or other suspicious material is easier to notice. If the pot has been sitting directly on an outdoor surface, inspect the contact points carefully. The bottom edge may stay darker and damper than the exposed sides. Small creatures can use that protected space as shelter without ever climbing onto the leaves while you are watching. A hanging basket creates different hiding places than a clear plastic pot, and a decorative sleeve creates different hiding places again. Adjust the inspection to the container you actually grow in. Cleaning the sides is useful, but the part I care about most is the part you almost never see while the orchid is sitting upright. Lift the pot and look underneath. Check every drainage hole you can see. Look for packed debris, deteriorated pieces of medium, roots emerging from the holes, chew damage, insects, egg-like material, slime trails, or anything moving when the pot is disturbed. Do not confuse a healthy root tip with a pest just because it appears suddenly at a drainage opening. Healthy orchid roots can grow through holes and attach themselves to nearby surfaces. The goal is to distinguish normal orchid growth from something that has simply taken advantage of a protected opening. Drainage holes matter because they connect the outside world directly with the potting medium. Some insects and other small creatures can enter through them, and organisms that prefer dark, damp places may remain hidden during the day. Roaches, bugs, pillbugs, snails, slugs, and ants are among the kinds of outdoor visitors growers may discover around pots or media. Their significance is not identical, so identification matters. An ant walking across a pot is not the same problem as a mealybug colony. And ants do not normally damage orchids directly, but persistent ant activity can sometimes accompany sap-sucking pests that produce honeydew. So it is a reason to inspect more carefully rather than a reason to panic. This is also where many beginners make an understandable mistake. They find one suspicious thing near a drainage hole and immediately pull the entire orchid out of the pot. Sometimes, repotting is justified, especially when the medium itself is badly broken down, heavily infested, or harboring a serious problem. But finding one visitor near the bottom does not automatically mean every root needs to be disturbed. First, determine what you actually found. Is the issue on the outside of the pot? Is it clearly inside the medium? Is there evidence of root damage? Is the potting mix already due for replacement for other reasons? The right response should match the evidence. Before deciding on a major intervention, clean up the simple material you can remove without disturbing healthy tissue. Take away dry leaves or flower pieces that have already detached and are sitting on top of the medium. Remove loose organic debris that has blown or fallen into the pot. Decaying material creates hiding places and makes inspection harder. If an old leaf is still firmly attached to the orchid, do not tear healthy tissue simply to make the plant look tidy. And do not start cutting green roots because they are inconveniently positioned. Cleaning means removing what is clearly dead, loose or foreign, not stripping the orchid down. If you are moving several orchids, Do not use the same dirty cloth or contaminated tool from one plant to the next without cleaning it. Hands, tools, and work surfaces can move pests or disease organisms between plants. For simple inspection, you often do not need cutting tools at all. If you do need to cut dead material or repot a problem plant, sanitize the tool between plants and keep the work area clean. That small habit matters more than making every pot look cosmetically perfect, because the entire purpose of this routine is to avoid carrying one plant's problem to another. Once the loose debris is gone, look for anything growing in the pot that is not supposed to be there. Outdoor orchid containers can collect weed seeds, and small weeds can establish in the medium. A tiny weed may look harmless, but it competes for water, light, and nutrients, and it can become more difficult to remove after the roots spread through the pot. If it comes out easily without pulling against orchid roots, remove it carefully. If a deeply rooted weed is tangled through the orchid medium, do not turn a minor weed into major root damage. That may be a reason to plan a proper repot rather than dig blindly through the container. By now, the upper plant, the leaf undersides, the outside of the pot, the drainage holes, and the surface of the medium have all been checked. This is the point where the most memorable outdoor hitchhikers often appear. Look again under the pot and around any tray, saucer, bench, hanger, or cachepot that traveled with the orchid. Snails and slugs prefer moist, protected places and are usually more active at night. They can leave shiny slime trails and irregular chew damage on flowers, tender growth, and roots. A very small snail can hide in a place that seems impossibly narrow during the day, then emerge after dark to feed. If you have seen unexplained chewing on tender growth, do not inspect only at noon and assume the culprit is gone. Check the protected areas and consider inspecting again when the environment is darker and the animal is more likely to be active. Avoid using table salt on or around the orchid to kill slugs or snails. Sodium salts can injure plants. The larger lesson is simple. Remove the hitchhiker and address the conditions that allow it to remain hidden, rather than using a dramatic treatment that creates a second problem for the orchid. Ants deserve a different kind of attention. A few ants moving through an outdoor growing area do not automatically mean the orchid is being eaten. Ants themselves generally do not directly damage orchids. But if you see repeated ant traffic on one particular plant, inspect that plant for aphids, mealybugs, scale, or other honeydew-producing pests. Ants may be attracted to sugary secretions, including normal orchid secretions in some cases. So again, the evidence has to be interpreted rather than exaggerated. The pattern matters more than one individual ant. At this stage, suppose you have inspected everything and found no clear pest, no snail, no suspicious chewing, no hidden weed, and no problem in the pot. That is excellent news. But I still would not carry the orchid inside and wedge it between two established plants on the same shelf. Inspection reduces risk. It does not make hidden eggs, tiny crawlers, or an early disease symptom magically visible. The next step is quarantine. And this is what turns a good inspection into a safer transition. Set up a separate observation area before you bring the outdoor orchids into the main collection. Ideally, the plants in this area should not touch your established orchids, and a separate room or clearly separated growing space is even better when practical. The area still needs reasonable light, airflow, and conditions appropriate enough that you are not trading pest prevention for severe plant stress. You also want easy access, because quarantine only works if you actually look at the plants again. One more practical point. Do not crowd the quarantine area just because every plant came from the same patio. If one orchid has a suspicious sign, give it more separation and handle it after the apparently clean plants, not before. Clean the surface afterward. When you inspect again, compare with the photos or notes you made on day one. A new cottony patch, fresh chew mark, sticky residue, or moving insect is more informative than a stain that has not changed. Quarantine works because it gives time for patterns to become visible, while the rest of the collection stays out of the experiment. How long should you isolate them? There is no single quarantine number that fits every situation, every pest, and every disease. American Orchid Society guidance varies by context. Some advice for new plants recommends at least 2 weeks of isolation, while other disease-specific guidance suggests a month or longer when possible. For an orchid returning from outdoors, the useful principle is to keep it separate long enough to recheck it, and to extend that isolation if anything suspicious appears. If you already know a pest is present, quarantine continues through identification and effective control rather than ending because a calendar date arrived. During quarantine, repeat the same high-value checks instead of inventing a new routine. Look under the leaves again. Check the leaf bases. Look at the pot rim, the media surface, and the drainage holes. Watch for new chewing, sticky honeydew, cottony deposits, scale-like bumps, webbing, silvery damage, or movement when the pot is lifted. If you discover a specific pest, use a control appropriate to that pest and appropriate for orchids. Insecticidal soaps, horticultural oils, physical removal, baits, or other products may all have roles depending on what you are dealing with, but they are not interchangeable. Whenever you use a pesticide or other plant treatment, follow the product label for the exact product you have. Do not exceed the labeled concentration because you want faster results. Do not assume a homemade mixture is harmless simply because the ingredients are familiar. And do not apply liquid pest treatments in direct sun or high heat, because treated tissues can be damaged. If you are treating an indoor plant, ventilation and the safety instructions on the label matter just as much as whether the product kills the pest. This is why I prefer the sequence inspection first, identification second, treatment third. It keeps you from turning every outdoor orchid into a chemical project. A plant with no evidence of pests may need nothing more dramatic than cleaning, isolation, and continued observation. A plant with a small, identified problem may be manageable without disturbing the roots. A plant with a heavy infestation inside degraded medium may genuinely benefit from repotting and a more thorough cleanup. Those are 3 different situations, and treating them as identical can create unnecessary stress. Now we have controlled the obvious hitchhiker risk, but there is another transition mistake that can affect a perfectly pest-free orchid, changing its environment too abruptly. Outdoor light and indoor light are not the same, even when the indoor spot looks bright to human eyes. A plant that spent the warm season under bright filtered outdoor conditions may suddenly receive far less light when it moves several feet back from a window. On the other hand, putting it against hot direct glass because you are trying to make up for indoor darkness can expose leaves to damaging light and heat. Choose the indoor position according to the orchid you are actually growing. Phalaenopsis generally prefers lower light than many Cattleyas or Vandas. A bright window with filtered light may work well for a Phalaenopsis, while higher light orchids often need a brighter position or supplemental lighting indoors. The important point is that inside is not a light level. One room may have several very different growing environments depending on window direction, distance from the glass, curtains, nearby buildings, and the time of year. Pay attention to airflow as well. Outdoors, even a sheltered patio usually has more natural air movement than a crowded indoor shelf. Indoors, leaves and media can remain wet longer if the air is stagnant, especially as temperatures change. Good air movement does not mean blasting the orchid with a cold air conditioning vent or a heater. It means gentle circulation that helps the plant and potting medium dry in a reasonable pattern. If you water after bringing plants in, make sure water is not left sitting in the Phalaenopsis crown or leaf axils overnight. Humidity can change too. The plant may have been exposed to humid summer air outdoors and then move into a home where heating or air conditioning dries the air. Do not respond by keeping the potting medium permanently wet. Humidity around the plant and water around the roots are not the same thing. A wet root zone with poor airflow can create its own problems. Instead, watch how quickly the medium actually dries in the new location and adjust watering to the new environment, rather than following the exact outdoor schedule. Quarantine is also the best time to resist overwatering. A plant that has just moved indoors may dry at a different rate than it did outside. The air may be stiller, the light may be lower, and the pot may stay moist longer. Check the medium rather than watering by the old outdoor calendar. For a Phalaenopsis in bark, that usually means watering thoroughly when the mix approaches dryness. then allowing excess water to drain freely. If the plant is in sphagnum moss, judge the moisture in the moss itself, because it can remain wet much longer than the surface appearance suggests. The move indoors should change your observations before it changes your watering habit. That brings us to the 10th check, and it determines when this entire process should begin. Nighttime temperature. Do not choose the moving date only because the calendar says September or October. The United States covers very different climates, and different orchid groups tolerate cool nights differently. Watch the actual forecast where you live, and know the type of orchid you are growing. The American Orchid Society advises growers to start bringing orchids indoors when nighttime lows reach about 55 degrees Fahrenheit or 12.7 degrees Celsius, while noting that Cymbidiums are among the more cold-hardy, commonly cultivated orchids and can tolerate cooler conditions. Phalaenopsis is a warmer growing group. AOS culture guidance says Phalaenopsis temperatures should usually remain above 60 degrees Fahrenheit at night. Although cooler autumn nights, around 55 degrees for a limited period, can help initiate flower spikes in many standard Phalaenopsis. That does not mean leaving every moth orchid outdoors through a sudden cold spell. Flower spike induction and cold protection are two different decisions. Other orchids also vary. Many Cattleyas, Oncidiums, Dendrobiums, Vandas, and related hybrids have different temperature preferences, and even within a broad group, species and hybrids can differ. Seedlings and immature plants can be more sensitive than mature plants. If you do not know what your orchid is, err on the cautious side as the forecast approaches the lower end of its likely range. Frost is not an experiment worth running. Cold injury may not become obvious immediately, and damaged tissue cannot simply be reversed once it has occurred. For growers with mixed collections, this final temperature decision is especially important. A Cymbidium that benefits from cool autumn nights should not become the reason you leave a warm-growing Phalaenopsis or sensitive Dendrobium outside too long. Move plants according to the most appropriate conditions for each group, even if that means bringing the collection in over several days. The same logic applies in spring when plants go back outside. Species, maturity, exposure, and local weather matter more than a single date on the calendar. Also remember that a forecast low is not the exact temperature every plant experiences. A pot against a warm wall, a hanging orchid exposed to open sky, a plant close to the ground, and a plant on a protected porch can experience different microclimates. Wind, humidity, rain, and the duration of the cold period all matter. That is another reason a single magic number cannot replace observation. Use temperature guidance as a decision tool, then combine it with the actual orchid, the actual location, and the actual forecast. If several outdoor orchids need to come in, prepare the indoor space before the cold night arrives. Clear the quarantine area. Make sure you have enough room to keep suspicious plants separated. Clean the surfaces, check the lighting. Make sure you can provide reasonable air circulation. Then bring plants in early enough that you are not trying to inspect a dozen pots in the dark because the temperature has already dropped. The inspection is much more useful when you can see what you are doing. And this is where all 10 checks come together. First, look at the whole plant before you disturb it. Second, inspect the undersides of the leaves and the protected crevices around the plant. Third, clean and examine the outside of the pot. Fourth, turn the container over and inspect the drainage holes and bottom. Fifth, remove loose, dead leaves and debris. Sixth, remove unwanted weeds without damaging healthy orchid roots. Seventh, look for ants, snails, slugs, and other outdoor hitchhikers, and interpret what you find instead of treating every visitor as the same problem. Eighth, quarantine the plant and identify any problem before choosing treatment. Ninth, help the orchid adjust to its indoor light, airflow, humidity, and watering pattern. And 10th, use the orchid's temperature needs and your actual nighttime forecast to decide when the move should happen. Notice what is not on that list. There is no requirement to repot every orchid just because it spent summer outside. There is no requirement to spray every plant with the strongest product you can find. There is no reason to cut healthy roots, soak the crown, or expose the plant to harsh direct sun as part of this transition. The safest routine is usually the one that responds to evidence and changes only what needs to be changed. A successful transition may look almost boring. The plant comes in with firm leaves and healthy roots. You inspect it and find nothing dramatic. You clean the pot, remove a little debris, keep it separate, and watch it. That is a good outcome. Prevention does not need a spectacular rescue scene to be valuable. In fact, the best result may be that nothing spreads, nothing needs emergency treatment, and the orchid simply settles into its indoor growing area. If you do discover a problem, that is still better than discovering it after the plant has been touching 5 other orchids for a week. Catching a snail under one pot, spotting a small mealybug cluster in a leaf junction, or noticing repeated ant traffic while the plant is isolated gives you options. You can address one plant, clean one area, and watch the response. That is much easier than tracing a problem through an entire collection later. So when the nights begin to cool, do not think of bringing orchids inside as carrying pots from point A to point B. Think of it as a short transition process. Inspect the plant, inspect the container, remove what does not belong, isolate what is questionable, and then help the orchid adapt to the new indoor environment. The few extra minutes you spend before the plant joins the collection can save a great deal of confusion later. The goal was never to prove that something was wrong with this orchid. The goal was to make sure a small outdoor problem did not become an indoor collection problem. If this checklist helped you, subscribe for more practical orchid care, give the video a like, and tell me in the comments what unexpected hitchhiker you have ever found hiding around one of your orchid pots. And before you bring the next orchid through the door, remember the simplest rule from this entire video. Check the plant, check the pot, and give it a little time before it rejoins the rest.